What happens when Hollywood's most enigmatic star goes head-to-head with British royalty on live television? You won't believe what unfolds when Johnny Depp completely dismantles Prince Harry in what started as a simple interview but quickly spiraled into one of the most shocking confrontations ever captured on camera. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what transpires between these two when the gloves come off. Last night's episode of The View took an unexpected turn when Johnny Depp, serving as guest host, welcomed Prince Harry for what everyone assumed would be a standard promotional appearance for Harry's latest charitable venture. The atmosphere in the studio was electric from the moment the cameras started rolling, but nobody could have predicted the verbal warfare that was about to erupt between these two cultural icons. Depp entered the studio with his characteristic swagger, dressed in his signature dark jacket and multiple rings, his long hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. The audience erupted in applause as he took his seat behind the iconic View desk, flashing that familiar crooked smile that has captivated audiences for decades. "Good evening, everyone," Depp began in his distinctively raspy voice. "We have quite the show for you tonight." His tone was playful, but there was something underneath, a sharpness that regular viewers of his appearances had learned to recognize. When Prince Harry made his entrance, the contrast was immediately striking. Dressed in an impeccably tailored navy suit, his posture rigid and formal, Harry waved politely to the audience before taking his seat across from Depp. The initial pleasantries seemed genuine enough. Depp complimented Harry's recent work with veterans, and Harry expressed admiration for Depp's artistic contributions to cinema. But anyone paying close attention could sense an underlying tension simmering beneath the surface. "So Harry," Depp began, leaning back in his chair with calculated casualness, "tell us about this new foundation you're launching. Another charitable endeavor, I presume?" The question seemed innocent enough, but there was something in Depp's delivery, a slight emphasis on the word "another," that made Harry's jaw tighten, almost imperceptibly. Harry launched into his prepared talking points about the Foundation's mission to support mental health initiatives for young people, his voice steady but his body language betraying hints of discomfort. As he spoke, Depp's eyes never left him, studying every gesture, every inflection. When Harry mentioned the importance of authenticity in public service, Depp's eyebrow raised slightly. "Authenticity," Depp repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "That's interesting coming from someone who's made quite the career out of reinventing himself." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. Harry's prepared smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "I'm sorry, Johnny. What exactly are you implying?" Harry's tone remained controlled, but there was ice beneath the politeness. Depp leaned forward, his rings catching the studio lights as he gestured. "Oh, nothing too complex, mate. Just observing how you've managed to transform from rebellious royal to Hollywood activist to mental health advocate. It's quite the evolution. Very strategic." The word hung in the air like smoke from one of Depp's cigarettes. The tension in the studio became palpable. Camera operators instinctively zoomed in, sensing they were capturing something extraordinary. Harry's hands, which had been resting casually on the armrests, now gripped them tightly. "I think you might be confusing personal growth with strategy, Johnny," Harry replied, his British accent seeming to sharpen with each word. "Some of us actually evolve based on our experiences rather than playing the same character over and over again." A collective intake of breath swept through the studio audience. Depp's signature smile never wavered, but his eyes darkened noticeably. "Ah, there it is," he said softly, almost to himself, before addressing Harry directly. "You know, for someone who claims to champion authenticity, you certainly seem comfortable throwing stones from that glass house of yours." Harry's composure began to crack. Glass house. That's rich coming from someone whose personal life has been tabloid fodder for decades. "At least I've tried to use my platform for something meaningful rather than just entertaining people while my own world burns down around me." The studio fell silent, except for the hum of camera equipment. Even the production crew, typically focused on their technical responsibilities, found themselves frozen, watching this unexpected battle unfold. Depp's fingers drummed slowly against the desk, a rhythm that seemed to match his measured breathing. "Meaningful," Depp mused, his voice taking on a theatrical quality that his fans recognized from his most intense film performances. Tell me, Harry, what's more meaningful? Actually living through your struggles and coming out the other side, or packaging your trauma into neat little sound bites for maximum sympathy? Harry's face flushed red. You don't know anything about my trauma or how I've dealt with it. At least I haven't hidden behind fictional characters to avoid dealing with reality. The accusation hit its mark. Depp's easy demeanor shifted, and for the first time since the interview began, genuine emotion flickered across his features. Fictional characters, he repeated, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Is that what you think this is about? The cameras captured every micro-expression as these two men, each carrying their own burden of public scrutiny and personal pain, squared off in a battle that was clearly about much more than charitable foundations or career choices. The audience could sense they were witnessing something unprecedented, a collision between two worldviews, two approaches to fame, two different ways of handling the crushing weight of constant public attention. Harry leaned forward aggressively. I think you've spent so long pretending to be other people that you've forgotten who you actually are. And now you're sitting here trying to lecture me about authenticity? The irony is almost too much to bear. Depp's laugh was sharp and humorless. Forgotten who I am? Kid, I've been exactly who I am from day one. The difference is, I've never pretended that fame was some noble burden I was carrying for the greater good. I've never tried to monetize my family drama or turn my personal relationships into public relations campaigns. The words hit like physical blows. Harry's carefully maintained composure was crumbling in real time, and everyone in the studio could see it happening. His breathing became more rapid, his hands now visibly trembling with barely contained rage. How dare you? Harry whispered, his voice shaking. You don't know what it's like to watch your mother's death be turned into entertainment. You don't know what it's like to have every relationship, every mistake, every moment of grief dissected by strangers who think they own pieces of your soul. But instead of backing down, Depp pressed forward relentlessly, and what he said next would change everything. Don't you dare talk to me about watching someone die for entertainment. Depp's voice cut through the studio like a blade. At least your mother was mourned. At least she was remembered as a saint. My reputation was crucified in public while I was still breathing. And you know what the difference is? I never once blamed the world for my choices. The studio atmosphere shifted dramatically. Even the most seasoned production staff had never witnessed anything like this unfold live. Harry's face went from red to pale in seconds, his eyes blazing with a fury that seemed barely containable. You're comparing a tabloid-feeding frenzy to my mother's death? Harry's voice cracked with disbelief. Are you completely insane? Diana was hunted by paparazzi until they killed her. She died because people like you created a culture where privacy doesn't exist. Depp's eyes narrowed dangerously. People like me? I never chased anyone with cameras, mate. I never sold stories about my family to the highest bidder. I never sat down for prime-time interviews to air my dirty laundry while my relatives were still alive to be humiliated by it. The reference to Harry's infamous tell-all interviews hit like a sledgehammer. Harry shot to his feet, his chair rolling backward with the force of his movement. You think I wanted to do those interviews? You think I enjoyed having to defend my wife and my children from racist attacks while my own family did nothing? Defend them? Depp remained seated, but his voice rose to match Harry's intensity. You threw your grandmother under the bus on international television months before she died. You destroyed your father's reputation, your brother's marriage, and your stepmother's dignity, all in the name of defending your family. That's not defense. That's scorched earth. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Several audience members audibly gasped. Harry's hands were shaking now, not just with anger but with something deeper, the raw nerve that Depp had just struck with surgical precision. My grandmother understood, Harry said, his voice barely controlled. She knew why I had to speak out. The institution was destroying my wife, just like it destroyed my mother. Depp laughed bitterly. The institution? Harry, you are the institution. You were born into it, raised by it, profited from it your entire life. And the moment it inconvenienced you, you burned it all down. Then you had the audacity to play victim while cashing checks from Netflix and Spotify. I was protecting my family, Harry shouted, abandoning all pretense of civility. Something you clearly know nothing about, considering how spectacularly you failed at keeping your own family together. The personal attack landed with devastating force. For the first time, Depp's composure cracked visibly. His jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a menace that made everyone in the studio take notice. At least when my family fell apart, I didn't blame the world and write a book about it. At least I didn't drag my children's names through the mud for sympathy points. And at least I never pretended that my personal failures were actually noble sacrifices for the greater good. Harry stepped closer to the desk, his formal posture completely abandoned. Noble sacrifices? You want to talk about sacrifices? I gave up everything. My title, my country, my family, to protect the people I love. What have you sacrificed except other people's respect for your ego? You gave up nothing. Depp exploded, finally rising from his chair to meet Harry's energy. You traded one form of privilege for another. You swapped royal duties for Hollywood deals. You exchanged ribbon cuttings for podcast interviews. The only thing you sacrificed was your dignity, and apparently, you got a pretty good price for it. The confrontation had reached a fever pitch. Both men were now standing, facing each other across the desk like gunfighters at high noon. The camera operators worked frantically to capture every angle of this unprecedented breakdown of celebrity decorum. Harry's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You know what your problem is, Johnny? You're a has-been who peaked in the 90s and spent the last 2 decades desperately trying to stay relevant. At least my fall from grace was for something meaningful. Your reputation died for what? Pirates of the Caribbean 5? The mention of his recent career struggles hit Depp like a physical blow. His face darkened, and when he responded, his words carried the weight of years of accumulated pain and frustration. Has been? Depp's voice was dangerously quiet. I've been creating art since before you knew how to spell privilege. I've earned every scar, every headline, every victory and defeat through actual work. You're famous for being born. Everything you've ever achieved was handed to you on a silver platter, and the moment you had to actually earn something, you ran crying to America. Harry's face contorted with rage. Earned? You call destroying hotel rooms and showing up drunk to film sets earning things? You call alienating everyone who ever tried to help you work? At least when I made mistakes, I owned them instead of blaming everyone else. Owned them? Depp's laugh was harsh and bitter. You wrote an entire book about how your mistakes were really everyone else's fault. You spent 2 years on a media tour explaining how being a prince was actually the hardest job in the world. You turned your personal therapy sessions into content for streaming platforms. The back and forth had become a brutal dismantling of both men's public personas. Each accusation was more devastating than the last, and the studio audience watched in stunned silence as 2 celebrities destroyed each other in real time. Harry moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. At least I'm trying to make amends. At least I'm using my platform to help people instead of just feeding my own narcissism. When was the last time you did anything that wasn't about Johnny Depp? Depp stepped forward to meet him, and now they were face to face, the tension so thick it was almost visible. Help people? You mean help yourself to victim status while actual victims suffer in silence? You've turned trauma into a brand, Harry. You've commercialized pain, and you've commercialized chaos. Harry shot back. You've made a career out of being unpredictable and difficult, and now you want to lecture me about responsibility. You're a cautionary tale, Johnny, not a success story. The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Depp's eyes flashed with something beyond anger, something that looked almost like genuine hurt. When he spoke again, his voice carried a cold finality that made everyone in the room understand that they had crossed a line from which there would be no return. Cautionary tale? Depp said slowly. Let me tell you what a real cautionary tale looks like. Your Royal Highness. The studio had fallen into complete silence. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath as Depp's words carried across the tension-filled space with deliberate, calculated precision. A cautionary tale is watching someone born into the most privileged position on earth. Someone who had every advantage, every opportunity, every door opened for them, and watching them throw it all away because they couldn't handle the basic responsibilities that came with those privileges. Depp's voice was steady now, but it carried a venom that made Harry's face go ashen. A cautionary tale, Depp continued, Stepping even closer is watching someone who had the power to actually change things from the inside choose instead to run away and spend years pointing fingers at everyone except the person in the mirror. You want to know what I see when I look at you, Harry? I see someone who had everything I ever dreamed of having. A real family legacy. A platform that could move mountains. Respect that was earned by generations before you. And you flushed it down the drain for what? A Netflix deal? Harry's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. You don't understand what it was like. I understand perfectly, Depp exploded, his theatrical restraint finally shattering. I understand that when things got difficult, instead of fighting for what mattered, you chose the easy path. You chose victimhood over victory. You chose to tear down everything your grandmother built instead of being man enough to fix it. The mention of the late Queen seemed to break something fundamental in Harry. His composure, already hanging by threads, snapped completely. Don't you dare bring her into this. You didn't know her. You didn't love her. You have no right. I have every right, Depp roared back. Because unlike you, I never pretended to love someone while simultaneously destroying their life's work on television for the whole world to see. You want to talk about trauma? Imagine watching your grandson trash your legacy while you're too sick to defend yourself. Harry's face went from pale to flushed red. She understood my position. She knew why I had to leave. Did she? Depp's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Or did you just tell yourself that to make the betrayal easier to live with? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you broke an old woman's heart, and then convinced yourself it was noble. The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Harry's breathing became rapid and shallow, and for a moment, it seemed like he might completely lose control. The cameras captured every micro-expression as he struggled to maintain any semblance of dignity. You're a pathetic, washed-up actor who's jealous because I had the courage to walk away from a system that was killing my family, Harry managed to say, but his voice was shaking now. Depp laughed, but it was a sound devoid of any humor. Courage? You call running away courage? I call it cowardice. You know what courage looks like? Courage is staying and fighting. Courage is taking the hits and getting back up. Courage is not abandoning ship the moment the waves get rough. I protected my wife and children, Harry shouted desperately. You isolated them. Depp fired back instantly. You cut your children off from their entire paternal family. You moved them to a foreign country where they'll grow up as outcasts from both worlds, too royal for Hollywood, too Hollywood for royalty. You didn't protect them, Harry. You condemned them to the same rootless existence you're living now. The words hit like physical blows. Harry staggered backward slightly, as if he'd been pushed. They're better off away from that toxic environment. Are they? Depp pressed his advantage mercilessly. Or are they going to grow up wondering why Daddy made them give up castles for California? Why they can't see their cousins? Why their grandfather won't speak to them? You've turned your children into collateral damage in your personal war against your own family. Harry's eyes filled with something that looked almost like panic. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Depp said with cold certainty. I'm talking about a man who had everything and threw it away because he couldn't handle the pressure. I'm talking about someone who chose self-pity over self-reflection, who chose exile over evolution. You didn't leave because you were brave, Harry. You left because you were weak. The final word landed like a death blow. Harry stood frozen for a moment, his mouth opening and closing as if he were searching for words that wouldn't come. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Then something in Harry's expression shifted. The anger, the desperation, the defensive fury. It all seemed to drain out of him at once, replaced by something that looked like defeat. He took a shaky breath and looked around the studio as if seeing it clearly for the first time. This was a mistake, he said quietly, his voice barely audible. This whole thing was a mistake. He turned away from Depp and walked toward where his jacket was hanging on a nearby chair. The cameras followed his every movement as he retrieved it with trembling hands. Where are you going? Depp called after him, but there was no triumph in his voice, only a kind of hollow satisfaction. Harry paused at the edge of the set, not turning around. I'm done, he said simply. I'm done with this conversation. I'm done with this interview, and I'm done trying to explain myself to people who will never understand. Running away again? Depp asked, but the viciousness had gone out of his tone. That seems to be your specialty. Harry finally turned around, and when he did, his face showed not anger, but something far more devastating: resignation. You know what, Johnny? You're probably right about everything. Maybe I am weak. Maybe I did make all the wrong choices. Maybe I am just a privileged brat who couldn't handle the pressure. He put on his jacket with mechanical precision, his movements stiff and disconnected. But at least I'm trying to build something new, instead of just tearing down everything around me out of spite. At least I still believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday, even if I'm not smart enough to figure out how to make it happen. With that, Harry walked off the set. No dramatic gestures, no final insults, no slamming doors, just a broken man walking away from a conversation that had exposed truths neither participant was prepared to face. The cameras continued rolling as Depp stood alone at the center of the set, watching Harry disappear through the studio exit. For a moment, his expression was unreadable, a mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been regret. Finally, he turned back to the cameras and the stunned studio audience. "Well," he said with a weak attempt at his signature smile, "I think that's probably enough truth for one evening." The show cut to commercial, but everyone in that studio knew they had just witnessed something unprecedented. Not just the destruction of two public figures, but a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the cost of fame, the weight of expectation, and the human capacity for both cruelty and vulnerability. As the cameras stopped rolling and the studio lights dimmed, the silence that followed was deafening.